We're starting off the show by diving into last night's marquee matchup of the USC Trojans versus the LSU Tigers. And like we talked about, this is a matchup between two programs that sort of have a lot to prove this upcoming season. You see the numbers attached to their names. USC coming into this season ranked number 23, LSU number 13. At the end of the day, we know that those preseason AP poll numbers don't mean anything, but the fact of the matter is both of these teams have expectations, and they're sort of built in similar ways despite the differences in these two programs, considering the fact that they are each headed into year 3 with their current head coaches. For USC, of course, it is Lincoln Riley. For LSU, it is Brian Kelly. And these were two heavily sought after coaches that were previously at big time programs. And the idea was that they were going to be able to carry on the legacy of their current programs in USC and LSU respectively. It's been a bit of a mixed bag up to this point through the first 2 years, where Lincoln Riley, I think that he gets a lot of flack because of the fact that they haven't made the playoffs yet, haven't won the conference yet, even though the fact that, in 2022, during Lincoln Riley's first season, he faced a very good Utah team in the championship game that ultimately, if USC wins that, I think he gets a entirely different, amount of credit for what he's done at USC so far. Was not a very easy turnover from when he initially went there. Yes, you have Caleb Williams, but outside of that, not a ton of NFL talent. So Lincoln Riley, he's done all right for what he inherited, but he needs to take that next step up. As for Brian Kelly, I think that he was not quite as popular headed into this next tenure previously with Notre Dame, and they had a handful of disappointing big game losses that a lot of people criticized Kelly for. And for whatever it's worth now, after this game, the LSU Tigers are 0-3 under Kelly in the season opening game. So he obviously still has a lot to prove himself as well. But then you look a little bit deeper into the rosters, and both of these programs are replacing former Heisman winning quarterbacks, and both of them have really struggled on defense as of late. So those are the two main things that USC and LSU need to improve upon, is making sure they solidify that quarterback play and making strides on defense. Now, defensively, I thought both teams showed great promise in each of those categories. We'll start with the defense, but I thought that both teams, got sufficiently on the board by the end of this game. Ends up being a 27-20 ball game, but the over-under line headed into this was 67.5, so more than 20 points under what the projected total was, and that's because of the defenses stepping up in a real way, I thought. And I thought it was more about the good defense than bad offense. We're going to be getting into the quarterbacks shortly here, but the front sevens of both of these teams were very impressive to me. I thought that you really felt the innovation of the new defensive coordinators. Like I mentioned, programs facing a lot of pressure. USC ends up bringing in Danton Lynn, and LSU ends up bringing in Blake Baker to try and manufacture some new looks for these defenses and make the most out of it. And I thought both of them did a pretty good job last night. Specifically here in regards to USC, I thought that they did a really good job producing pressure up front, and then the secondary specifically was very impressive as well, where you look at that second level cornerbacks, and even, I'll group the linebackers into this, the way that they were just flying all over the field. This is a team that has been, hurt in the passing game a lot in years past, and LSU, they still had a very good game from a passing perspective as well. They ultimately finished with a total of, double checking here, but, over 300 pass yards, so it's not like they were entirely locked down, but they did a good job, all things considered, not making anything easy, forcing Nussmeier and the Tigers to put together strategic drives. I do think that they could have been a little bit better in the run game. I actually didn't even really realize it during my first watch of this game that LSU's drives actually stalled through the air more than they did in the run. LSU ran the ball pretty well, all things considered, 117 yards on 4.5 yards per carry. So maybe an area that USC is going to have to beef up on, though. But speaking of beefing up, I thought it was very interesting as well that ESPN, they showed the graphic and with the pictures of some of USC's key defensive players from last year to this year, and explained the fact that USC behind the scenes was working with nutritionists and trying to build up the size of those defensive players. And as opposed to the usual in the current NIL era, building through the transfer portal and such, USC was actually able to, yes, they dipped into the transfer portal as well, and we saw, I thought, a very key performance as well from transfer Kamari Ramsey, who they took in the portal, and he was all over the place. I believe he led the Trojans in tackles in this game, so it's not like the transfer portal isn't a positive factor for USC, but doesn't all have to be through the portal. There are things you can do within your own program to take steps forward, and I thought that USC showed that a little bit, but obviously none of it would have been possible without the play of quarterback Miller Moss, who I thought was very impressive. Both Moss and Garrett Nussmeier making their second career starts, and Miller Moss, specifically focusing on him for a minute here, he was 27 of 36, 378 passing yards, 1 touchdown, 0 interceptions. I thought he was very impressive, especially so on the game-winning drive where he was throwing under pressure and just that pinpoint accuracy. We really saw the ceiling of it a little bit as well. Just the fact that he was making difficult throws. He was hitting receivers exactly where they needed to be. He ends up picking the majority of those much-needed yards at the time through the air, made pretty quick work, and ultimately put them inside the red zone where they were able to finish the drive off with a touchdown run from Woody Marks. But, Miller Moss was the one who was getting it done on this drive, and I thought that that was just about as reliable of quarterback play as you could have gotten. The fact that it wasn't necessarily death by one wide receiver, 10 different players with a reception in this game, nobody with more than 5 catches for USC. So I thought that, again, Moss showed a lot of maturity almost to be able to entirely survey the field. I think that, yes, of course, there are going to be, accuracy things where you can take steps forward, but I don't think that he put the ball in harm's way. I thought that, again, you're playing an LSU secondary that maybe does have some question marks, but all in all, he was methodical. He put together these drives, and USC could have had more points as well, but I thought a couple times with the passing game, with the penalties and with the run game, they actually set themselves back a couple times, including when they were stopped in the red zone and had to settle for a field goal, and an illegal blindside block sort of almost killed their hopes. They still almost got there because Zachariah Branch, as we sort of move on here to talking about the receivers, Zachariah Branch continues to show how special of a talent he is. It is, still going to take a little bit of time for him to develop all of the route running, the releases, to be a dependable, wide receiver every down in the passing game. But, when they draw these plays up for him to get touches and they get him out in open space, he's special. He had the 40-something yard kick return as well. Branch is going to be an elite athlete for years to come, and he would be really interesting to see if he ends up emerging as a top weapon for Miller Moss, but this is a deep wide receiver room, even if we don't know exactly who the number one option is, where Kyron Hudson, he definitely made a name for himself last night with the couple of incredible catches that he had, the one in the first quarter, and then the one on that game-winning drive where he makes the one-handed catch through the targeting contact as well, that sets them up for that easy touchdown run at the end. But you're looking at a lot of promise. I already mentioned Branch, Jacoby Lane, Deuce Robinson, another couple of sophomore talents that could be standouts for USC moving forward. I think that there's a lot of promise on the offensive side of the ball. The run game, again, wasn't great in this. I do want to credit LSU's defense, though, because that is a very talented front seven. Harold Perkins, by the way, led the Tigers in tackles. I just know how much production he can give you from a pass rushing standpoint that it's almost a little bit frustrating watching him playing a little bit further back on that second level with the linebackers. But at the same time, if he gets results, he gets results. They sent him on a couple blitzes, so I guess that sort of is the perfect time to transition here into the LSU Tigers. We'll start here with the positives, starting with Garrett Nussmeier, 29 of 38, 304 pass yards, 2 touchdowns. He did have an interception on that final drive, but at that point, kind of an empty stat there where the game was already over at that point. I don't think this was Nussmeier getting outdueled. I thought he was also excellent. Now, that being said, LSU is most certainly going to have to score more than 20 points per game to continue to be competitive, but I thought that this was a nice reintroduction to Nussmeier, like we mentioned with Moss, also his second career start, and I thought he was really good. I thought he settled in pretty comfortably. Unlike USC, it seems like there's already a little bit of a more definitive hierarchy in terms of the wide receivers, where Kyron Lacey was everywhere for the LSU Tigers, especially so on that first drive. I think he had 4 receptions then alone, but he finishes with 7 catches, 94 yards, and a touchdown. I would also give some credit as well to Mason Taylor, who definitely seems like he could have a big impact on this season. The third-year tight end, another 7 catches for him as well. A little bit less yardage, 62, but was a little bit of a comfort valve, I thought, for Nussmeier when he needed it, especially when he was under pressure. So I thought there was a lot of positives from this LSU offense. Like I mentioned, they ran the ball pretty well. Additionally, John Emery, who they're hoping can have a big season for them, had a couple explosive runs. I thought that LSU could have committed to the running game a little bit more because they were having success and sort of turned away from it. But either way, I think a lot of positives for this offense moving forward. The main concern is with the defense, and that's been the case. And like I've been saying, I think that it's been a very positive step forward for the LSU defense, limiting the USC offense to 27 points, which I know isn't spectacular, but again, given the expectations for both of the respective units, that's pretty solid. But at the end of the game, when you're looking at the fact that it was obvious passing down situation towards the end of that game with USC, they're dropping back to pass, and LSU just could not get the stops. They are going to have to take steps forward in that department, and I'm not sure what it is necessarily going to be for them. You see they're relying on some freshman talent as well at the backside of that secondary. PJ Woodland getting a good amount of playing time last night, the freshman cornerback. He was getting picked on a little bit, I thought, from Miller Moss, especially those couple plays down towards the red zone that helped set USC up for a score. they're capable of taking the next step forward. But I mean, ultimately, I think what it's going to take for LSU, given what they currently are on the roster, I think it's just going to be their offense needs to produce more for them, because I don't know if I have a ton of expectations in their defense leveling up even further. I think their front seven is going to continue to produce, but that back end is a little bit dicey for me, and I'm just not sure if they're ever going to fully be able to recover from it ever. I mean, more so this season, but ultimately, again, big win for USC. You saw the line started creeping up more and more in favor of USC throughout the week. I think that people were sort of overlooking, I should say, what USC's defense is capable of. Again, I thought that both teams, for the most part, answered some of those questions heading into them. Seems like both of them are going to be set at quarterback, that defenses are taking the next step. But that being said, there are some limitations with both of these rosters. USC, again, LSU runs the ball more. I think we could have seen them get exposed more. And then LSU's secondary, I think, was also sort of put on display a little bit in a negative light. But let me know what your takeaways were from this game. But we are going to be moving on here and then diving into the next premier game from the weekend, and that was Saturday night's matchup of Texas A&M and Notre Dame. So we will be diving into that next. But first, we are going to be taking a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.